Alright, so before I start this video, I need to address something really quickly. I messed up. So I searched and I searched. I pulled my hair out a little bit, and then finally, I just had to admit to myself that I goofed. I didn't hit record on OBS, so the entire process of me earning the silver medal and making the peacock walkthrough, yeah, it doesn't exist. So to make up for that, I'm showing off the habitat in the beginning. That's basically the same thing, and I don't want to hear any different about it, so moving on. So we're back in the Maple Wildlife Park, and this is Gold Part 1, not the last of the Silver since I messed up the recording. But basically, we're going to be focusing on making this little restaurant area and then putting in the grizzly bear habitat. So, of course, I'm picking plaster, as I always do for this type of thing. And I was experimenting with a different shape because I wanted to leave room for other facilities as I went. So I decided to go with this L shape and then just leave the window cutouts as I went. So that way, as I unlocked more food and drink shops, I could just throw them in there because there's never enough drink shops in this game. So they were changing the color. I went with something a little more earthy and warm since I'm going to surround this whole thing by trees and I don't really have any nice looking wood walls. I stole these from the restaurant area on the other side of the map. I'm just putting them here so there's some similarities. I decided I wanted to put foliage there instead of a shop, so I switched where I put my second open window. I think last time we had just unlocked the Arctic scenery, so I just went ahead and used them for some texture on the upper walls and some height. And something I like to do is use these wooden beams to add trim using the Arctic roofs. Adding the wraparound parts for the L shape. I thought about using a different type of roof, but we're just going ahead and using the same Arctic wood. And then I decided to put these extra little bump outs on top of each side, just so I could have some added variation. Using the roof trim all around each piece so that the wall isn't just flush with the roof, because I never like how that looks. And since this is going to be an area where there's going to be a little garden, I decided to border it off with more wood pillars for later. And because I just like how they look and I like the texture of them, I decided to add them to each corner of the building. And moving around to the other side and finishing that off. Of course, you want to take your plaster pieces, which I thought about using a different kind of, or just using the wood like the top, but I went with the plaster instead for filling in the gaps where the roof was. Use your little ones, and then I think they're 4-meter high. So this is a little trick I like to do with these when I don't want to add extra roof pieces, is just split them from the group and push them in a little, and I believe I do that with the big pieces as well. Oh no, I don't do that. I actually do pull the roof pieces out and just let them hang over. And I never did like how they looked if you just leave it flush with the wall, so. Go ahead and drag it over. You give it a little wiggle so the textures don't fight, and that's basically it. Now we're moving on to this toilet that I have right outside of it. I'm just covering it in the Arctic wood pieces and then adding the 2-meter high walls on top of it to give it some height. I use the round arch piece. And then once again, using those, I don't know what they're called. I think they're just called Arctic beams. But I'm putting them inside because I don't really like the look of just the regular old tile there. And I even take some, sink them into the ground, and then put them in front for a better transition. And to help blend those ugly tiles, I change their color to more earthy, warm tones so they don't stand out so much. Next, I have to fight the game to put the bracket there because it always wants to float, And then put our toilet sign on, even though, you know, they don't really need it, but just for some immersion, and fighting that as well since it doesn't like to clip to the bathroom walls for some odd reason. Using those same Arctic rooftops for this, I'm using the slightly taller one, and then I decided to go with plaster on top here, doing the same thing, splitting the roof from the group, and then just making a little bit of overhang on each side so it doesn't look so plain. Using those wood pieces again, I'm cutting off where the plaster is meeting the wood, so that's not such a jarring transition from the two of them. Putting it in the back as well. For the trim on these buildings, I opted to use the Arctic wooden beams that have that patterning on it instead of just the plain ones for some extra texture. Go ahead and then slide them into the back as well. And then I'm using these corner trims for all four sides of the roof. They tend to blend really well and I don't have to worry about texture fighting with them. The star here is good for some light and decor, and I use the string lights on the other building just to make them match. And my go-to for just regular lighting is always these basic wall lights because everything else to me just seems too bulky. I'll go ahead and put some on the toilet as well to help light that path when people come out of the exhibit area there. And, you know, giant windows on the toilet because everyone wants to see what you're doing in there. And adding air conditioning because you can stay cool while taking a crap. Putting this door around the back to pretend like the staff can go out, and then just adding the final little touches to this area. I never did like these tiny little windows from the Arctic pack, but they kind of work for when they're up higher because you can't tell that they're so puny small. So finishing up. I thought that the walls still looked flat, and so I decided to add a little bit of trim. The back sign is not as important because nobody's going to see it, but I can see it and it bothers me. Some upper windows on the staff side, and then of course my little tiny wall light that I use everywhere. Going ahead and filling in the areas around that I'm going to be layering with foliage, with dirt, basically preparing it like a little layout. Using just the stands, the same as the food court on the other side of the park, because the big signs just weren't fitting in with this particular park. And now I'm starting the foliage. So I'm stealing things from just around the park that were already part of the, when you first come in, it's just all these plants are already there because I want everything to match. These little tiny flowers really work well to blend the path into the foliage, which is something I always try to do. I don't like that. I'm not a big fan of just abrupt changes, and especially if you're not going to use curbs on the path, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. So in that case, I like to use things like rocks and foliage to make the path a little more seamless with the ground around it. And of course, I always take trees and other things from around. I wanted this area to look like it's enclosed within a forest. You're just kind of walking through a forest and come across this restaurant here. Stealing the thistle around, just layer it as much as you can. Don't be afraid to just take plants from everywhere and pile them on top of each other until it looks nice and full. And I like using the bracken because it is a lower setting plant, but that particular one also has some height that other low-lying plants don't have. So again, just variation. I really like these purple flowers because they add a splash of color in an otherwise just pure green kind of area. And again, they have little leaves that hang over the path and help blend it in. That's how it looks like so far. Just taking a peek how it looks from the perspective of the guests. And again, using little, I think they're called dwarf cone flowers. They're really good at just making that nice seam between the path and the ground around it. starting to finish it off here around the bathroom area. Usually when I'm working on something like this, I set myself an area and I finish just that particular area. It sort of gives myself a smaller goal. There it is, all finished. And since we unlocked the Arctic benches, I decided to go around and replace a couple of the basic benches with the new Arctic ones. I don't do all of them, but at least some of them, just to stick with the theme. And I believe, I don't show it, but I also changed some of the trash cans. So here's our grizzly bear. I don't know. Anyways, he's our next animal. I just kind of mapping out an area in my mind where it's grizzly bear, in between is going to be the staff, and then will be our Nyala. So I like to use brushes to map out a basic area of where I want stuff. We're going to use the red brick this time for the habitat barrier, since grizzly bears can't climb over that, and it's just sturdier for them, I guess, to make our guests feel artificially safe. I was trying to make sure it didn't line up or go over the bench, because I don't know why I always end up putting benches where they're gonna block the view, but I end up changing that anyways, so it doesn't really matter. And I made the decision to have this path wrap all the way around the grizzly bear habitat, because I don't know why, I just thought it might be cool if the people could walk next to that water, since I'm not utilizing that water for any of the habitats. You can have saltwater crocodiles in this zoo, but I never put them in because, one, they're really expensive to feed, and two, the water just feels really far away to build for me, and it costs money to have a water filter in there. So I just try to save money where I can. Here's the staff thing that's going in between the two habitats. That way I don't have to make a separate area for the Nyala. Both of these habitats can just run off of the one area. And putting in the habitat gate, because I'm going to just be making the grizzly bear's habitat out of rock, trying to make like a natural cave, so I'm not having to build anything like a hard shelter around that habitat gate. Turning on, of course, random rotation. Really important if you want more variation with the direction and look of your rocks, but you're too lazy to keep using shift or whatever you use to move your rocks, because I certainly do. I used to not use that. It used to just be I would do everything by hand, and it got really old really fast, and I don't remember what YouTuber it was, but yeah, he basically put me on to the idea of turning on rotation and then setting it to 30, and that way you don't have to constantly be moving the rock around and pausing what you're doing to adjust it. You can kind of just plop it down really fast and move on, especially if it's not an important piece and you don't need a whole lot of variation within it. I ended up moving these rocks several times because I couldn't really figure out the angle that I wanted the cave to be in. And I did eventually figure it out, because the first time too much of it was blocking some of the viewing points, so I kind of went with this pinched sort of thing. I just use the flat rocks to cover up the top so they have an adequate amount of hard shelter for the grizzly bear. Make sure they fit in there. If I was you, I would kind of let the grizzly in there, even though the game's going to complain at you that he's loose. Well, then you'll be able to get the size of him a little better, but I never think of that when I'm doing this stuff. I kind of just, whatever, I wing it. If I have to fix it after he's in there, but as long as you pause the game and check the animal's needs in the navigable area, once they're actually delivered, you really shouldn't have any issues with them escaping or anything like that, so don't worry about it too much. Just using some of the rocks to kind of blend this in so it's not so abrupt. And I like to have these flat areas where I can set enrichment. That's what I'm doing right here. I like to have these little areas where there's just a flat space, because it gives me just a little area where I can set their enrichment. And I use all the little small rocks to make it look like there's varying piles around the area. Just going over the top here with some flatter rocks so everything doesn't look so uniform. Then I decided I wanted to put in some kind of upper path using the rocks that the bear could climb over. And I really like to use these slopey looking rocks as a step up because most animals can fit on that, whereas some of the other rocks that I've used, they kind of have difficulty. The pathing doesn't necessarily work, but with these, you can do what I'm doing and double them up, and the animal's still going to be able to climb up that without any issues, at least in my experience. Grizzly bears are not the best at finding a path in this game. Like, a lot of things can throw them off, but the one I have, he can get up that just fine. And if you do have problems, you can do that and just add a little step up at the bottom of them, and that should fix it. So here I'm realizing, well, you know, those benches are going to get in the way, and I didn't want to move them because I liked them there, so I just went ahead and made the front viewing area huge, just a huge piece of glass, instead of worrying about whether the benches were going to be in the way. Make sure you highlight the gate and change it to something else like thread brick, because the bear can climb over that if you leave it wood. Go ahead and finish and wrapping the walls around the back, and I like to sink the end into the rock because I'm basically using that hard shelter as a custom wall. I guess I'm just realizing, hey, this is way too short, so I'm going to raise it up because I didn't think the grizzly would fit under it. It just seemed really smushed down. This is why you let him in there so you can tell, but after adjusting that, I picked the null barrier, use that on any areas that you don't want to have an actual barrier. And then I was thinking here, well, this is awkward because if I put the brick there, it was going to cut off some of my other rock work. So my solution was to just take the really flat rocks, stand them upright with the 45-degree angle, and then kind of use them as a makeshift wall. And that way I wasn't cutting off a bunch of my rock work. The bear can't get back there even, so it's not a problem. He's not going to be able to get over those rocks. Just some finishing touches with some more layers, and then it's on to the terrain work. Now, I don't know off the top of my head. I know they like rock and dirt mostly, a little bit of grass. So I just kind of go with my instincts when I'm putting down my first layer of terrain, because I like to make a path out of dirt, just a path that the animal would be constantly walking, because animals have a repetition to them. Even in the wild, they tend to traverse the same paths over and over again. But if the animal doesn't like the terrain I put down, I just adjust it when they get in there. And even though the bear can't climb the brick walls, I was afraid that was still too short, so I had to raise it up a little bit just in case he could climb over that. I put it at somewhere like 3 meters or something like that. Putting down his bedding. Even with these, I like to layer them up so it looks more natural and not just body. Then I thought, well, he could probably get under this rock, so I can just use that as another little hard habitat, and he can lay there if he want. I wasn't 100% sure, so I raised it up, and I actually ended up raising up again later after I was completely done filming, because when he sits, his head kind of disappears into the rock, but that's okay. Making him more space because I just wanted to make sure he could actually get under there, which he can. It looks a little goofy, but he can definitely get under there. So before I bring him in, I go ahead and put down his food, and I like to use this little water chow, which, be careful if you're doing it like this and covering it with rocks, because I found that sometimes the keeper can't fill it, he can't reach it. The animal can get to it, but the keeper can't get to it to fill it with water. So this one, I'm not sure. I never got a notification that the bear couldn't drink it, but it very well could be. I play a lot on pause, so he might be able to get in there and he might not, but I just think it looks better to add some rock detailing around it rather than just leave it as that weird flat box that they have with the colors that don't really match what I'm going for. So just adding some little tiny rocks around. And then of course you got to put your education boards in, very important to earn money, educate your guests. With the speakers, I tend to hit V to get them to cling to the back of the monitors, but these cost like $100 a pop, so if you're struggling with money at this point, just wait to add them. Then to help blend the path more into this particular habitat, because people are walking out of that Indian peafowl directly into the grizzly bear habitat, and I wanted it to seem like you're walking into his cave or his habitat as opposed to just running into a brick wall. And then I used just the plain white version to make it pop since it was blended in. And I made this sign, I think in the last episode, I don't remember, it's been a while, but I just made a custom sign to put some letters on, and it's being used over in the reptile area too, but I decided to just go ahead and repurpose it and use it here. Putting on the grizzly, I always forget how to spell grizzly. I think I don't know if it's supposed to have 2 Z's or 1 Z or, whatever. And it was just grizzly, but then I said, screw it, let's put in bear, and this red is way too jarring, so it gets to be yellow, because yellow is my favorite color. Here's where that. Go ahead and putting him in there. And, oh my god, here he is. So checking off to make sure my dude's coming in, my mechanic's coming in every 6 months and not every year, because especially when a predator's in there, for some reason the walls break down fast. And I think the red brick walls break down even faster than, I don't know. They say that if you check each habitat barrier, it'll tell you how fast they degrade. And I can't remember if brick degrades quickly or not. Put down our donation bins right next to our education. Now it's time for my favorite part of every habitat build, and that's plants. Lots and lots of, probably too many. Like I said, I have a mod that lets me put in as many as I want, so I can sort of just go insane for every animal, and I take full advantage of that. I like to use low-lying plants in the beginning. I basically always do that, and I layer them around my rocks, around edges that look goofy or just look like they're not blending in very well. I put a bunch around the water thing because it was still looking odd to me. And then I decided to use the big puffy pink flower bushes, which I know a lot of people don't like and they never use, but I don't care, I like them. I think they add some nice color variation and height differences to go along with the just normal purple ones. I'm using a lot of flowers for this grizzly, so he better be happy about that. Again, I usually add trees like this at the end because it's very easy to go overboard with big trees and then you lose sight of the animal. So I tend to put the big trees near the back and put them in last so that clearly I don't have as much space to put a bunch of trees in if I've already put down all these low-lying plants. And then I thought it was cute to have this little tiny tree near his water, so he gets one little baby tree. Putting down some final touches of, I think those are the brambles and the bracken around his little sleeping area, just filling in any cracks within the rocks. A good foliage tip is taking any of the big bushes in the game like this one and stacking them up against a wall. Kind of makes this leafy waterfall effect. And even up top here, I tend to put foliage. Even though people aren't going to see this, I just like how it looks. It makes it feel more organic and less man-made. I even put just a few inside with the bear. Again, nobody's going to see this. I'm probably not even going to see it. It just makes it feel more alive. And filling in this weird little gap area, clear in the back. Last thing I did was, I think that's buffalo grass, and I like how it just filled in between all the other foliage that I'd already put down. Checking to make sure he's all good. Traversable area looks good, he can't escape. And then in the front here, I thought the area between his habitat and where the people were looking in looked a little funny. So I just took inspiration from where the sign is and put down a secondary wall, if you will. It's not really a wall, but just some rocks to help blend in the area, make it feel like people are part of the experience. And any little cracks or crevices or areas that are feeling bald to me get filled in with a million of these tiny little flowers. And of course, I can't forget the area around the habitat. I don't like to leave that just with nothing in it because then it feels out of place next to this habitat full of trees. And again, with this park, I like to make it feel like a forest. It's supposed to be North American, so taking one last little look, and there you have it. And that's basically the end of this video for now. I apologize that the peacock habitat didn't get recorded. I really have no idea what happened. I looked, and I'm pretty sure, unfortunately, I just didn't turn on OBS, which, hey, it happens. But the final video of the Gold series is going to be the Nyala and 2 more exhibit species, which I just go ahead and put right outside the grizzly habitat, and that'll do it for this park. Next park is the Caldera Park, which is probably my least favorite, but hey, what are you gonna do? So yeah, if you liked this video, go ahead and like and subscribe, and I'll see you for the next one. Thank you.